The date is 15th April 1986. Of the security wing of the pre-trial detention center at the Hamburg police headquarters, the police brought in a contract killer for interrogation. The space contains 7 people: the culprit, his wife, his lawyer, a typewriter, 2 police officers, and 1 public prosecutor. The file reads the name of the culprit as Werner Pinzner, who is sitting next to his wife, Yuta. Around 10 a.m., the prosecutor reads his rights to Pinzner and then says, quote, "So Mr. Pinzner, let's shoot," unquote. The typewriter moves her hand towards the keyboard in anticipation of the answers from Pinzner. As they begin the interview, while answering the prosecutor, Pinzner calmly says, quote, "Gentlemen, this is a hostage situation," unquote. In order to understand what went wrong on 15th April 1986, let's go back and understand the life of Werner Pinzner and what made him the assassin that we know of as the St. Pauli Killer. Hi, I am Dhanvi, and this week we are off to Germany. As always, I want to provide a disclaimer that I am not a professional when it comes to investigating a case. I am just a person who enjoys listening to true crime stories. The facts of the case presented in my content are taken from reliable sources, and anything other than the established facts is a mere speculation or a fan theory and should be treated as such. Like every story cannot be complete without supporting characters, this week's story is just the same. Whoever Werner Pinzner was, his life would not be the one he lived if it weren't for the people who surrounded him. To get to know him, let's unfold his life little by little, till the day he reached that interrogation room. On 27th April 1947, Werner Pinzner was born in a middle-class family to a radio mechanic and a grocery store manager in the district of Bahrenfeld. From what I read, he never finished his education. Rather than that, in 1964, he went into the sea for 2 years as a seaman. A seaman is someone who works as a sailor and is below the rank of an officer in the official navy, so to speak. In 1966, he worked as a driver for a few weeks and then went back to the sea. As mentioned by Werner, he wanted to continue to stay at the sea, but because of his previous minor crimes, his criminal records stopped him from moving ahead on the hierarchy chain. It's not quite clear when or where he met his worst wife, nor we know who she was, where she was from, what her name was, but between 1966 and 1970, he got married to her. He was sentenced to prison for the first time in 1970 as a consequence of an unknown crime, but for a short amount of time. And in 1971, his daughter was born. Though I never found any reports of the name of the daughter or what she looked like, and none of that was ever made public. Once he got out of prison, he worked as a scaffolder, tiler, and butcher before committing a major crime in August 1975. He and his 2 accomplices robbed a supermarket where a 28-year-old male was working as a manager of the store. The theft resulted in the death of the store manager, though it was never made public as to who shot the manager. At one side, Wikipedia suggests that one of his accomplices shot him, while another news article suggests Pinzner did it. Regardless of that, in September 1975, Pinzner was sentenced to 10 years in prison. According to the story by Welt daily newspaper, an online article mentioned that the city of Bahrenfeld was a home to Pinzner, but was also a home to a lot of immigrants. And since you didn't belong to that area, you didn't belong to any race or color, you could get away with minor crimes. And since Werner was born there, he got a certain amount of power that he could get away with a crime. Once sentenced, Pinzner was sent to Fuhlsbüttel prison, where he served 9 years, and later to Wehrland prison. Once he settled in prison, he got acquainted with some of the big names from St. Pauli, which was at that time one of the biggest red light districts of Hamburg, and was also a house to pimps, brothel operators, and drug dealers. This was also the time he got addicted to drugs and started using heroin and cocaine. Pinzner bought a .38 caliber Arminius revolver and stored it in the personal locker at Wehrland prison. Under the liberal Hamburg penal system, each prisoner had a locker which went unsearched by authorities. This was a loophole Werner found and used it to commit more crimes. As he was spending his time in prison, the area of St. Pauli was bursting with strip clubs and brothels. Two major gangs existed at the time. Nutella gang, that was one of the gangs, which was a pimp organization who controlled a decent amount of prostitution in the late 1970s and 80s. And GmbH, a rival, a similar organization to Nutella gang, who never interfered in each other's business. If there were any issues to be resolved, they would use fists rather than guns. During the 1980s, prostitution was slowly declining as a consequence of the rising fear of HIV infections. Because of this, international illegal organizations started getting more popular in the district alongside the German pimps. Illegal activities like drug trafficking, arms dealing, or receiving stolen goods became a source of income. This resulted in disputes between prostitution and drug traffickers. Finally, in July 1984, Pinzner was released from prison, and without wasting time, he started his journey as a contract killer. He started working for the red light district to make a name for himself, and was famous among German gangsters, since he would kill anyone for the right price. Between 1984 and 1986, in mere 2 years, he killed at least 13 people. Once out of prison, the Chicago gang, a gang which was similar to Nutella and GmbH, commissioned him to scare and kill people who tried to disturb the gang's drug circle. They asked him to get Yehuda Erzi's finger, to which he happily obliged. So, on 7th July 1984, his first kill was an ex-brothel owner and dealer, Yehuda Erzi, who had an unpaid drug deal on his head and also blackmailed his former wife and daughter for money. Pinzner shot him in the head, killing him instantly. For the deed, he received 40,000 Deutschmark, which is equal to approximately $22,000 in today's time. 12 September 1984. His next victim was Peter Feilmeyer, one of the partners at a club named MB Club, which served as an organization of drug trafficking and illegal gambling. The two partners of the club asked Pinzner to assassinate Peter by giving him $17,000. So, as Peter parked his car in a garage complex, Pinzner shot him in the head, again killing him instantly. As time passed, because of the killings, everyone feared Pinzner in the red light district. Rather than getting a partnership in the brothel business as he hoped, they sought him as a contract killer amongst the many pimps and gangsters of the city. At one end of the city, several murders were being committed. But at the other end, police were working hard to identify a link between these dead bodies. At the end of 1970s, it was speculated that high-ranking police officers were working together with pimps and prostitutes, forming an investigation group against organized crime. The police worked with various informants and used wiretapping in order to find a link between all the murders, and also to find one important piece of evidence: the murder weapon. According to the similarities of the murder, to catch the culprit, a formation of special commission took place, named SOCO. The evidence collected from the undercover operations was compiled and started questioning the witnesses and suspects. On the morning of 15th April 1986, a police task force entered Pinzner's house. As Pinzner exited his bathroom with disheveled hair, naked and wet except for his socks, police searched his entire apartment and found the murder weapon. According to the article by Welt, they found the murder weapon, the .38 caliber Armenius revolver, on the sofa, loaded. Once arrested, Pinzner was ready to cooperate with the police and agreed to name the people who were working with him. Around the time of his arrest, a bounty of 300,000 Deutschmark or $165,000 was on the head of Pinzner as he was preparing to testify in front of the public prosecutor. Every criminal has a right to defend himself. In Pinzner's case, he had someone who not only helped him with judicial work but also helped smuggle cocaine and heroin into the prison. Named Isolde Oxley Misfeld, she was a woman with struggles which forced her to comply with Pinzner to get more financial stability. Werner influenced her to such an extent that it led to smuggling the murder weapon, which he will use to kill others and then himself. The event of 15th April 1986, articulated by Welt, took place as follows. Around 9 am, Detective Inspector Timo Schultz appeared in the security wing to pick up prisoner Pinzner. Before Inspector Timo arrived, they searched Pinzner thoroughly for questioning at the police headquarters. Once handcuffed to the officer, they took Pinzner to the police vehicle, which was followed by a mobile task force car. Police were afraid that the people whom he worked for might want to silence him once and for all to save their faces. So, Pinzner was surrounded by officers and had high security till he reached the headquarters. Once they arrived there, they took him to the security wing. At the entrance, public prosecutor Wolfgang Bistri, Pinzner's defense attorney Isolde Oschle Misfeld, his 39-year-old wife Jutta Pinzner, a typographer, were waiting in the visitors' room. Pinzner had declared that he would confess to his crimes, but demanded his wife's presence, as permitted under the Code of Criminal Procedure. Until now, the professional killer had confessed to 5 murders and another 6 in different letters and conversations, including all the details related to the murder that only he would know. Bistri entered the security wing with 2 other women. The security did not search the defense lawyer because the regulations did not provide for it, and did not search for the wife since she accompanied the lawyer. This was a huge mistake, as the gun, which will be used to execute the murder and suicide, stayed hidden in Jutta's underwear. Apparently, in her handbag, Jutta carried a wool stocking with 12 cartridges and later went to the toilet to hide the revolver in her purse. In room 418 at 10 o'clock, everyone was present. Shortly after 10 o'clock, the prosecutor began the investigation. Bistri instructed Pinzner on his rights and then, in a cheerful and a friendly tone, said, quote, "So, Mr. Pinzner, let's shoot," unquote. The typist was ready with her hands on a typewriter, anticipating the first sentence. At 10:20 am, exactly at that moment, Pinzner reached into his wife's purse, drew his revolver, and calmly said, quote, "Well, gentlemen, this is a hostage situation," unquote. Bistri jumped up, hands outstretched, and fell seconds later with a yelp as 2 shots from Pinzner's revolver entered his body. The 2 officers escaped into the corridor while the typist took cover behind the desk. The lawyer took shelter under a table, and at the same time, the officials from Mobile Task Force, emergency doctors, and paramedics had been alerted. Pinzner pushed a desk in front of him, called his daughter, and said his goodbyes. He then handed the phone to Jutta, while she said, quote, "What is happening now is what we wanted," unquote. She knelt in the middle of the room as Pinzner put the barrel of the gun in her mouth and pulled the trigger. As she lay dead on the floor, Pinzner kneeled next to her in the same manner and pulled the trigger, resulting in his own death. The damage was done. Pinzner escaped the harsher sentence by executing his perfect plan, by simply manipulating two women to agree to his actions and requests and carry out his quote-unquote execution. Soon the commandos stormed the room and took the badly injured prosecutor, the typist, and the lawyer to the hospital. A day after this event, the public prosecutor succumbed to his injuries, closing the list of people Pinzner killed by adding his name in the end. Once things calmed down in the headquarters, several questions arose. First, the security precautions in the police buildings and prisons were under massive criticism. The lady lawyer was also under investigation for being a part of the deed, as she was the one who got him the weapon. The court sentenced her to 6.5 years of suspension on the pretense of helping with the murder. The open prison in which they kept him also received major backlash, as the lockers which were provided to all the prisoners were never checked. The weapon that was used by Pinzner to kill when he was on leave from the prison went undetected in prison lockers. If there were regular inspections, they could have avoided the murders Pinzner committed to a great extent, and this day would cease to exist. The interrogation room where this horrible murder-suicide occurred no longer exists today. The headquarters has been relocated since then, and the building is now unidentifiable in the cityscape. If he had received a proper sentence, the case would have done justice to all his victims. Pinzner was someone who loved having power in his hands and being able to close a chapter the way he wanted. Instead of giving the police the ability to take away his power, he took control of the situation and did exactly what he wanted, ultimately claiming all the power for himself in the end. The revolver with which he committed suicide is on display at the Police Museum of Hamburg, maybe as a reminder of the criminal that he was and their shortcomings, which led to the rise of someone like Werner Pinzner. Thank you for listening to this episode of Shades of Macabre. If you want to hear more about true crime stories, be sure to subscribe to our podcasts wherever you are listening. You can also find the images related to the case covered on the podcast on our Instagram and Twitter at Shades of Macabre. Follow us on social media to receive updates on other episodes and let us know if there's a case you want us to cover. Stay tuned for more tales from the dark side on Shades of Macabre.